Welcome everyone for the second last edition of the Polygon UK webinars for this semester. We're very happy to have Sergio Galletta today from Zurich, and he's going to tell us about BallotBot. Can AI chatbots lower voter information barriers? Just to say that in 2 weeks we'll meet again on 15th of December with Bart Harstad for another one. Thanks a lot, Sergio, for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thanks a lot for having me. So for today talk, what I'm gonna do will be to talk about this project. As you said, it's called BallotBot. Can AI chatbots lower voter information barriers? This is a project that I've been doing together with the Elliott. Ash is a colleague of mine here at ETH, and Giacomo Opocher is a brilliant PhD student in Bologna. Okay, so the kind of project we are trying to do here, just to kind of set expectation already at the beginning, is a project where we try to contribute to the broader literature that try to understand how AI is affecting society, but we're gonna focus on a very specific piece or kind of topic, which would be political information. Okay, and within political information, what we are trying to do is to understand whether policymakers or benevolent policymakers that might want to have a tool that could be useful for voters in order to gather information, whether the deployment of this tool might have positive or negative consequences on these potential voters. Okay, so we won't talk about the more broader idea of how AI might affect media content or misinformation. It's going to be very specific, and we're gonna do we're gonna run some experiment to test specifically this kind of idea where you might have policymaker that try to provide a tool for voters in order to gather information. Okay, this is just to give you the initial part. And if some of you is kind of familiar with some of the work me and Elliott have done together with other co-authors, we are basically moving a bit away from the idea of using AI or machine learning to generate new variables. And we are thinking about the AI and machine learning more as a T, so the treatment. Okay, so more thinking about whether using or give these tools as a treatment will affect certain kind of outcomes. Okay, so in terms of motivation to the paper, we start from the standard way of thinking about accountability and elections. Information is essential for voters in order to have an understanding of what's going on in the political arena. And we need that in order to have this sort of accountability process. And then you're going to have politicians acting in a way that would be responsible with respect to voters. In a world where media information is widespread and people can have access to a lot of information, this might be kind of affecting the ability of voters in order to gather information. Okay, so let's assume that we are in a world where media are not biased and information is spreading the best way possible. We might still have voters having some cost in gathering information. Okay, and these, of course, might affect the kind of information they gather and the way in which they educate themselves in order to potentially make some decision where they're voting. So keeping in mind this kind of issue, we have, on the other hand, something that is happening in the recent year. And I guess, so we started the project a bit more than 2 years ago. So I think things now are a bit different. But when we started the project, we had this idea that these tools will eventually become relevant in society. And we actually see that in these days statistics. And when I think about these tools, I'm thinking about chatbots. Okay, I'm thinking about ChatGPT, Gemini, these sort of LLMs. We have seen in the last 2, 3 years clearly a huge increase in the usage. And the recent statistics, more or less recent, is telling us that around 800 million, we have around 800 million weekly active users on ChatGPT. Okay, so these tools have been used by more and more people over time. And if we think about the existing research, of the effect of this tool on, let's say, economic outcome that economists might be interested in. Typically, we see that these tools have a positive effect on productivity. Okay, particularly if we think about knowledge-intensive tasks, which could be, let's say, coding, could be writing text, or gathering information that are essential in order to complete the task. And the crucial point suggested by these papers is that these tools mostly work through a decrease or a lowering of the information barriers. Okay, so what we're gonna try to do then in this paper is to try to think about this growing literature telling us that these tools, chatbots or AI powered chatbots are allowing people to increase their productivity in the work. And typically this is due to an easier access to information. And we plug this in to this other idea where we have that voters might actually face a relevant cost issue in order to gather information. Okay. So the research question that we're going to address is the following. So how does using AI chatbots to deliver information impact voters' information acquisition cost, political knowledge, and engagement? Okay, so these are the kind of three outcomes that we're going to try to explore as potentially being affected by the use of these tools.
Can
So
I
here,
ask
yes,
here?
yes,
So there's three outcomes. You are going to define them precisely, and
yes.
so obviously the question in the background is, are they necessarily a good thing? So, if this may require increase polarization and things like that,
Uh,
then that's going to be an issue, perhaps.
so I think so that's kind of the maybe the next paper. So for this paper, kind of again to kind of set expectations, going to be a kind of an experiment, and we're going to try to see whether indeed using or not these tools will have an effect on these three different outcomes. The consequences of having an effect of these three different outcomes on, let's say, polarization or other aspects of politics, we didn't touch that yet. Okay, and yeah, so that's just to answer to your initial question. Um, so here is the slide where I tell you basically everything about the paper, and then of course I'm gonna go deeper. Um, so what we do, what we did was to develop a specific chatbot that we call it BallotBot, which is AI driven chatbots that it's trained on specific topics about elections happening in California in 2024. Okay, so we are basically focused on a specific kind of elections. So these are referendum that were happening in California in 2024. And we basically run an experiment, an online experiment during the time of this election. Okay, and we're gonna basically, as you can already expect, gonna have kind of two groups. Someone is gonna have a chatbot, and another group is gonna have something else that will be the voter guides. Okay, so that's the kind of experiment we are doing here. So we're gonna have three different ways. We recruited around 1,500 individuals through Prolific. During the different waves, we ask different things and we try to gather the outcomes of our interest. Okay, so in the first wave, we try to test first whether our chatbot compared to the traditional voter guide affect the ability to accurately answer questions related to the topic that's going to be voted about. We're going to try to understand kind of what we call subjective cost of gathering information. I'm going to be more specific about this later in the talk, and we're going to try to have a measure of engagement with the topics. Okay. Then we leave the participants to the experiment to potentially access the ballot bot or the voter guide. And later on, we're gonna do other quizzes and other questions related to the topics to see whether there is some retained knowledge due to the experiment or the usage of the tools during the week. And then we're going to also have, of course, as an outcome, their reported voting behavior, meaning whether they turn out into the election or whether they voted yes or no to the referendum we were focusing about. Okay, so these are the results. Okay, so what we see is that the group that was having access to BallotBot have a lower perceived cost of acquiring information. And this is particularly true for individuals that prior to the experiments were not much aware about the referendum. We see that those that had access to BallotBot, they seems to have a greater engagement in political information. And all this is happening at the same time as the chatbot seems also to improve the ability of correctly answer to questions related to the topics in the referendum. When we look at the second and third way, we don't see much of an effect in terms of turnout or voting behavior. We do see kind of an effect on whether people were able or not to answer it correctly to quizzes when you have a closed book, or to open questions about arguing whether or why you voted yes or no. Okay, so I'm gonna be more specific on this point by the end of the talk. Okay, but so this is basically what we do and the results of the paper. And now I'm going more into the details of the structure of the experiment and the other relevant information. If there is there any question? Otherwise,
Just a question, will you address where the ballot box bot is coming from, or what's, what is it?
Yeah. I will. Yes, definitely. So okay, so the kind of way, although it's very narrow, let's say the kind of question we're addressing here, we think that it's quite in line with the growing literature that think about how this Gen AI and LLM revolution in gathering information will affect democracy. Okay, so if you look at the media literature, you have all these kind of events that happen in history that might have had an effect in the democracy, and we're thinking that this piece of paper or this piece of research we are providing is adding to a new strand of literature that focus on LLMs and democracy. Now, as I was saying already before, our focus, so to have a kind of a real situation to work with, is about California ballot measures that happened last year, okay, in the time where there were also presidential elections. We focus on three propositions, okay? So let's say California is one of those states in the US where voters can have quite some voice through proposition or initiatives. Here we picked three propositions that were about three different topics, okay? And the idea for us was to focus on different type of topics to see whether our tools or our research might have produced different outcomes depending on the topic of interest, okay? So we focus on three propositions. At the same time, there were other 9 propositions that people could vote about. We focused just on 3 because we had to generate 3 different treatments, meaning 3 different bots, one for each of these propositions. So one was about raises minimum wage. One was about expand local government's authority for rent control. And the last one was about crime and a related issue where you would have an increase in sentences for people that were committing certain kind of drug and theft related crimes. Okay, so these are 3 different topics, some on crime, some more on economics. So these are the results you have here. And so this is just to say that in principle, these are not topics that are, I mean, I would say that there might be some Republican versus Democrats idea on these three dimensions. But like, for instance, raise minimum wage, you see that it's almost 50-50. So these are topics that are more related with policy, not really about politics, okay? More or less, okay? Just to make a difference between the bots we generated, which is about this sort of elections, and maybe bots that can be generated to give information about, for instance, presidential elections or governor elections. Those might be different, and the consequences of using those might be different, okay? So this is a timeline of the experiment. So in California, you actually have the ability of voting in advance compared to the actual election day. So the polls open the 7th of October 2024. Our experiment ran from the first wave of the experiment was basically on the 10th of October and I think the 11th of October. The second wave was a week after. Elections were actually taking place, or the polls closed on the 5th of November. And then after that, we also have a third wave where basically in the third wave, we actually ask voting behavior. Okay, so the first wave, we do certain things. In the second wave, we do other things. And then in the third wave, we ask for kind of electoral or behavior in elections. Now, I'm gonna start with by defining the two groups we're gonna have in these experiments. So the control group is a group of people that are gonna have access to the voter guide. Okay, so in California, whenever you have to vote in this kind of referendum, similar to Switzerland, let's say, you're gonna receive at home a pamphlet where you're gonna have a few things written down. Okay, so this is issued by the Secretary of State, and it basically tells you the potential outcomes for your life of having a yes or a no as a final outcome of this referendum. In there, besides the more objective outcomes, you also have arguments in favor and against the referendum, and this is present both from the advocate side but also the opponent side. Okay, so this is basically a documents that voters receive at home and is supposed to give you some objective information with respect to the potential outcome, but also, let's say, objective information of the opponents and those that are in favor. So what we did was to take this voter guide, and we generated basically three websites that they looks exactly the same as the voter guide you would get for each of these referendum. Okay, so the control group is going to be a group that's going to access easily a website that reminds a PDF where you can search whatever you want in terms of the topics of these three referendum. The treatment group is this BallotBot. Okay, so today it's relatively easy for me to describe what we did. I mean, it's not as easy as I'm about to say, but let's say that this is basically a ChatGPT where we added a PDF with all the information from the voter guide. Okay, so that's basically what we did. Of course, when we did it back then, it wasn't as easy as it would be now. But basically, we're using this idea of RAG, so retrieval augmented generation, so that the chat, when it answers to you, it actually starts from the knowledge we give them. And we generate constraints such that individuals cannot use the chat to do other things, okay? So that's kind of this one is the prompt instructing our chatbot. So remember, it's like some GPT, you put a PDF, you add this prompt. So you're a ballot bot for California election, you're an expert on proposition, whatever, and trained on the voter guide, you help answer questions about proposition, whatever, okay? Don't answer unrelated questions. So this is basically our chatbot. And as for the voter guide, we developed three different tools. Okay. Um, so this basically what people had access to. I do not click. I mean, I used to do click and then show how it worked. I think it's not online anymore. Otherwise, I would have done that. But you would have later a kind of an accuracy matrix based on how people use it and how use it when they were answering our questions. Okay. So what we have again is treatment. It's going to be guys that have access to this ballot bot, and control group. It's going to be like individuals, voters, they're going to have access to the voter guide in a digital way. Remember that anyway, I mean, the voter guide, almost everyone gets it at home, but that's kind of fixed across the two groups. Okay, so the only things that change is basically the way in which they access, or the facility, or the easy way in which they could access information. So this is the experimental design, or the different steps. So the green in this part in green are basically the outcomes we are extracting from the different phases. So we start with around 1,500 individuals. We split them across the three different propositions, and we start asking general question about how much do they know of the topics, and other questions related whether ideologically where they position themselves, and other characteristics respect, for instance, about their attitudes toward AI, and so far and so on. At this stage, then we split between those that have the voter guide and those that have BallotBot. Okay, so this is the first split we do. And then the first things that we do in the first wave is to ask them to answer 5 closed answer questions. These are incentivized. So whenever they get an answer correct, they get 20 cents more with respect to the standard payment they would receive because they were spending their time doing our experiment. Okay. And here, what we get is accuracy, duration, and confidence in the answer. So,
Sergio, can I
yes,
ask a question?
yes.
So do you define an aim of the study as well? Because in a way that the aim would determine how people would engage with the ballot box. Like, what is your objective? Why should I ask questions to the ballot box? And how much people engage with the ballot box would determine their correct answers. And
So,
why should I engage and so on.
so they say this part of experiment, I guess the only things that they have in mind is that they get more money if they answer correctly at this stage. Later, there are no incentives anymore, so they might have their own intrinsic motivation in order, I mean, like to access more information. So that's something we're gonna kind of check later. So let's say at this stage is more you're treated, you are controlled. Okay, try to answer the best as you can to these questions. And remember, at this first stage, you can actually use the tool. Okay, so keep in mind. So at this stage, you can use the tool. So in a sense, I guess by now everyone understands that these two tools works very well. Back then when we started, it wasn't that clear. So at the beginning was also for us to understand whether the tools were working well, was working well. So that's just to also to keep in mind in the overall picture of the experiments. But later they could use also the tools the way they wanted. Okay, so we didn't nudge them in ways that they might see it as good or bad to use it. Okay. So the other, I would say, most relevant outcome for us is this idea of perceived cost. Okay, and here what we do is basically to try to have an estimate of potential subjective cost of answering questions. Okay, our story in our mind is basically that these tools, also looking at the previous literature, might allow people to gather the information in an easier way, and therefore potentially having them access either more information or the information they would want. And one aspect is that we want to understand whether there is a reduction in perceived cost. Okay, to do that, we kind of elicit their willingness to answer an additional question. Okay, after the 5 questions at the beginning, we ask whether they want to answer an additional questions, and we ask them how much they would like to receive in order to answer that question. And so the idea is that the higher is the amount you ask, the higher is the cost for you in order to answer a question. And then we basically use kind of a method in order to elicit their true willingness to accept by randomizing a number. Okay, so you can say, well, I'm gonna request 0.6 dollars in order to answer the next questions. Then we're gonna have a random number generator, a random generator number. If your bid is above that number, then it's okay, you can go ahead. If it's below, then it's not okay, you're stopping there. Okay, so that's the way in which we elicit like the true perceived cost. And after this, we have other aspects where we try to understand whether they like or not the tool compared to the original voter guide, how much they use it, and other outcomes I'm going to tell you about later. The last part, the second and the third way, is the part where we try to understand whether there is some kind of retained knowledge from the first experiment or the usage of the tool in the week from the first to the second wave. And in the third wave, again, we're going to ask about vote behavior and turnout. Okay, so this is the full experiments, the 3 waves and the different kind of outcome we're going to look at. There is another level of randomization that we include here, which is an important one. And I mention it now so that might stick somehow in your mind. So after you reply to these 5 questions, we actually randomize whether you know or not how well you did during that test. Okay. This come as I mean, could have multiple interpretation. We did it mostly because from the literature in like human-computer interactions, we know that knowing how well might be some AI tools will affect your trust in the AI tool. Okay, and we think that's important as a component for you in order potentially to affect your perceived cost. Okay, so if you trust the tool and you did well, maybe you might ask less to answer an additional question. Okay, so now we are kind of adding a layer of randomization that for us is a way to have a trigger in terms of how much you trust the tools we provided to you. Okay.
Hi, can I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
I have a question about, one that's a bit mechanic about the design. How did you select the initial population?
So these were people from Prolific.
Oh, so it's prolific.
Yes, that's Prolific.
Okay.
Yes.
So I guess
From
there's
Californian voters from Prolific. Yes. So basically people above 18 that have the right to vote in elections in California.
I see.
So there is, of course, some potential imbalance in some characteristics. Let's say, of course, you have more Democrats than Republicans, let's say, given that you are in California. So there might be some non-representativeness if you think about the broader population, but kind of, I guess this is somehow standard if you rely in this kind of aggregators of people participating in experiments.
Yeah. And I have a second question that said, I don't know if this is the right time to ask it, but in the way this is presented, one way we could think about the chatbot, it's a little bit like an automated canvasser, right? So like something that's going to personalize a message. I've got all the information I need, but I can just ask the question the way I want it, and I'm going to, receive the exact information as I asked it. And so I was wondering whether you can say something about whether any effect we find, is it due to, the accuracy of information, or actually that whenever we have something that's a little bit more personalized, we end up caring a little bit more. That's what a canvasser does, right? It convinces you that you should care about this.
Okay,
So
so
it's not really about the publish, like you have an analogy with publishers, but it feels a little bit more like the canvasser knocking on your door
yeah,
and
no, I see,
convincing
I
you
see.
that
So
you should
yeah,
care about this.
yeah, no, I guess that's a good point. I guess I mean, the way we are doing this and the the narrow context, we don't get to that point. So let's say the way they are using it is mostly to answer these questions that are questions, very specific questions. So it's not that during the first wave they're using it really to. I mean, there is a part where they might try to learn stuff for themselves, but most of the relevant outcome, I would say, is not about what you're saying, but rather really comparing the use of these two tools, like one tools compared to the voter guide, and how these affect this kind of accuracy outcome and perceived cost, and not much about how tailored is your question to the bot, and how this maybe the fact that you are tailoring the question in a way that it's representative of you will affect the outcome. I don't know if that kind of make it a
Yeah.
bit clear, but
And I suppose also maybe if I see the results, actually I'll get a better
yeah,
answer. I'm
no, but
sure. I
that's a good point. So
should.
but that's already a kind of a good point in the sense that the we are not experimenting in an environment or the context we are using is not really about tailorization or personalization of the question you're posing, although we believe that that's probably the most interesting part, but somehow it comes as a second step. But it's rather more focused on very specifically, okay, let me see if people have these, do they perceive a lower cost to gather information? Okay.
Thanks.
No problem.
Can I ask I think it's slightly related maybe question, but I'm not sure. So here you gather information by asking explicit questions about various stages at which they acquire information. But that is an experiment, and that feature can be affecting the comparison of chatbot versus information, and therefore it is not representing the real life situation that you would have in the world. So in the world, I imagine to be closer, you sort of ex post ask people about the outcome of this, or whether they prefer to use chatbot versus something else, because it and that is evidence of this having an effect. But here you are, you are asking questions that may affect their perception. Information is more important, not, for example, party affiliation. So affecting the research question itself.
You mean that somehow kind of the, let's say, external validity of the sort of experiment, it's somehow limited because we are focusing on I'm not saying I will not say no to your comments. I guess again, like I think for us, this is kind of a first step that where we are trying to understand. But I don't know. Tell me if still what I'm about to say is not externally valid. But so it's really to understand if someone had this tool, and we try to understand whether this tool might affect the cost of acquiring information. Will that really happen? Okay. And we thought that this kind of very narrow, quite specific experiment might give a hint toward that direction. Yeah. Then to the extent that this thing we're doing has external validity, I mean, I think that this idea of perceived cost is still externally valid. Um, But of course, if you start moving away from the kind of referendum, I mean, like there are many things that might change as soon as you move from our context, and it might be different and will maybe not provide the same results as we find here. But just again to say, so the points we are making in the paper is if a policymaker wants to provide these tools, and these tools are used in a way in which people want to gather correct information, these tools seems to play a positive role in society. That's basically the overall point of the paper.
Sergio, can I ask a question as well?
Yes.
So I was wondering whether you asked them whether they use if they use AI before answering the questions. And so because if yes, given that they're doing this online, I mean, if I would be paid based on how many questions I get correct, I would put all the questions into ChatGPT anyways, even if I
That's a very good yeah, okay. So we did control for so I mean, let's start with so these are the kind of balance and descriptives of the sample. So consider that 80% of the sample actually used some AI already in the past. Okay, so and, of course this is a balance between treatment and control, which in principle is not a problem. So what we do is basically to check the amount of time they spend outside the window. Okay, and we don't find a difference in that. But clearly, that's a potential confounder.
I mean, if anything, it means that you're estimating in absolute values
yes.
lower bounds, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
not.
Correct. It goes against us because in principle you would have the voter guides guys going on ChatGPT, putting there the information, and we don't have evidence on that. Let's say, yeah. So I'm gonna go a bit quickly because I think I have more or less I don't know 10 minutes or 20 minutes, depends on how we want to split that. So this is basically the sample. The characteristics are balanced between the control and the treatment group. As I said before, you see quite a lot of people have already used AI. This is November 2024 in California. I mean, I think makes sense. I mean, we did the pilot in I think January 2024. It actually the number were flipped, so we had like just 20% of the people had used AI in their life. But I guess today value might be, I don't know, 99% of the people have used AI are being using AI. We do also have information, and this is important for our results, about previous knowledge of the topics. Okay, that's something we're going to use in our analysis. And we also have some information on their media consumption or media diet. Okay. Now, because of the fact that this is an experiment, the regressions might be relatively easy. So we're gonna look at these. So the fact that you get assigned to the BallotBot group or the voter guide group. We include all the pre-treatment controls in our regression. And we do robustness checks, including question fixed effect, quiz results fixed effect, and as a way to control for things that are fixed across questions or whether you get it right or not at a certain point. So now what I'm going to do would be to look at results on different outcomes. As I said at the beginning, the first thing they do once they have access to this thing is to answer to certain questions. Okay, they have five questions to answer, and these questions comes from a pool of 12 questions that are in 2 levels of difficulty. So what we did was to generate for each topic different questions and 2 levels of difficulties, what we call the basic and the in-depth questions. So the basic are questions that come from already the first or the second page of the voter guide. Okay, so these are things that are pretty straightforward about the referendum, and we asked them 2 of these questions. Okay, we picked 2 among 6 of these questions. And then we have the in-depth questions. So these are really in-depth. So these are more specific about what's going to happen or specific estimates of the cost or whatever, having the minimum wage or things like that. Okay. And again, everything is randomly sampled and they see them in a random order. We also ask about confidence. I don't know if I have the results about confidence, but we have no effect of treatment on confidence, just to say, because I might not have that graph. So the first thing that I'm going to show you is to say, look, if people were using these two tools, let's say the BallotBot and versus the digital voter guide, you're going to have that those with BallotBot, they have a 80% increase in accuracy in the answer they give. Okay, that's true if we look at in-depth question. Okay, so if we want to say, is this BallotBot useful for you if you are someone that wants to look at some difficult question and you want to find the answer, that's true. Okay. If we look at basic questions, not much. Okay. So basic questions, there isn't much difference between those that are using BallotBot and those that are having access to the voter guide. If you look at response time, this is interesting. We do find a reduction in the time spent in order to get these previous questions. If we focus in the in-depth questions, but actually, if you're looking at the basic questions, you have an increase in time. Okay, so in a sense, it might have been easier to just have an immediate look at the voter guide, and you will immediately get the kind of question you needed. Okay, so overall, we see that these tools or this tool is good if we think about difficult questions. Okay, so again, this accuracy effect, I want to be clear, it doesn't mean that people understood more, okay? It just means that these people that have BallotBot have been able to retrieve the information better than those with the voter guide, okay? There is no yet an idea of knowledge acquisition or something like that. And again, for us, it was also a way to test whether it worked, okay? Now, the outcome that for me or for us, it's the relevant one is this about the information cost, okay? As I said before, when I was describing the experiment, we have this incentive compatible price elicitation procedure where we're gonna try to understand what's the cost that you're gonna associate to gather more information, okay? So participant can choose an amount which is 0 and 1 in order to answer an additional questions, but I'm going to get it only if this non-randomly generated number is equal or lower to the chosen amount, okay? So this is for us what we say the subjective cost of acquiring additional information. And as I said before, with respect to an additional level of randomization, here, again, what we do is to say half of the sample will know about how well they did during during the part where they were supposed to answer questions, and half of the sample will not know that. Okay, so half of the sample is kind of unaware of how well they did. Okay, now this is the first set of results from this part of the experiment. So this is the part where we have feedback. Okay, so this is the group of people that got some information about how well they did. Okay, if we look on average, we have a negative but not significant effect, meaning that doesn't seem to be there some effect on perceived cost. However, when we make some heterogeneity based on prior knowledge, and I mean everything was pre-registered, okay? So and we find that those that have low knowledge of the topic are the ones that are benefiting the most in terms of reduction in subjective cost, okay? So this is very coherent with the literature on the effect of AI on productivity at work and related topics, because what they show very often is those that are gaining the most from accessing this tool are those that are lower in the distribution of the skills, okay? So those that are gaining the most from using these tools are those that are not yet the best. Okay, and this is again something very much coherent with what we have been seeing from previous research focusing on other kind of tasks. So this is quite interesting, and somehow from a policymaker perspective might be quite interesting to be able to reduce the cost of accessing information to those that indeed do not have much information at the beginning, right? Because if you're already quite informed, maybe that's fine. And it doesn't seem that the chatbot is playing a role in terms of affecting the perceived cost. Okay, so the next slide is going to be about the group that didn't have access to the feedback. Okay, so these are the results for those that didn't have access to the feedback. Okay, so the treatment is clearly the same. Everything is cross-randomized, and here we don't see much of an effect. Okay, the story we are having in our mind is indeed the fact that these tools, in order to have some consequences, you need people to understand that they are good. Okay, you need people to have some level of knowledge that these tools are trustworthy. Okay, so that's the way in which we interpret these results. And again, this might have interesting consequences if you think from a policymaker perspective. Let's assume you want to deploy your AI chatbot for elections. It's not enough just to deploy that. Okay, you maybe want to have or give intuitions to voters, whatever the accuracy or the ability of these tools to work well. Okay, because if you don't know that, you won't get those benefits from using these tools. Now, the rest of the results for the first part of the experiments are about engagement. And we have different way in which we measure engagement of individuals with the political information. So we have these four elements. So basically now we want to say, are those with BallotBot more likely to gather additional information? Okay, not just about the questions we gave before, but additional information. Okay. The first part is about, so after all the things I talked about, they had some times in order to try answer to questions that they feel are important to educate their decision. Okay, so this is custom questions, and we're going to look at the time people spend to gather this kind of information. Then what we did was to provide a link to chatbots, okay, about the other propositions, okay? So after you do the first part, then if you wanted, you could click and get information to other propositions, okay? So that's another thing that we track, meaning that if you click, means that you might want to engage or gather information also on other topics. Then we have their self-reported quality, or how they perceive the quality of the tool. And then we have something about the usage of the tool in the week after the experiment. Okay, so these are the four variables that we use to proxy engagement. And so what we see is, first, those that are using BallotBots, they tend to spend more time in order to collect information that might be useful for them to have kind of enough knowledge to then make some voting decision. You have a sorry, an higher probability that people are going to click to a button in order to gather information about the other propositions. There is a higher probability that they're going to say that the tool we are providing is better than their usual means of information. But we don't see a difference in the take-up. Okay, so we don't see that people that have been using the bot are also more often using the bot in the week after the experiment. Okay, So basically, we could track usage of the bot and the voter guide. Okay, so we could track if an individual was using the bot or if an individual after the experiment was accessing the the website where we had the voter guides. Okay, so that's the way we do it. The second wave, we use it to try to understand if there is some retained knowledge. As I said before, the first part of the experiment, it wasn't really about knowledge. Okay, it could be just I mean, GPT is better in retrieving information compared to me retrieving it from a PDF. Okay. And so what we did in the second wave was basically to ask again three quiz questions similar to the ones from the first wave. And in addition to that, we also have an open-ended question where we ask individuals to provide some reasoning or some description of why they voted in a certain direction or why they didn't vote or why they voted. Okay? So then what we did was basically to generate a quality measure, which is actually based on GPT evaluating the questions, and we find that this works relatively well if we compare with the human annotator. So now what I'm going to show you is going to be results about the second wave outcomes and knowledge. Okay. So what you see here is that we do not find an effect on retained knowledge in neither the two. Okay. So the fact that you were exposed to the treatment doesn't affect the probability that later on, after a week, you are actually replying better to the quiz. And that's also true if we think about the reasoning, okay, when you argue about why you voted in a certain direction. Part of the story, of course, is the fact that we know that only 10% of the people have used the bot or accessed the voter guide in the week leading to the second wave. Okay, so here you could have part of the story is that, well, I guess we didn't expect that the exposure to a 30-minute experiment a week ago would have affected the knowledge later. We were thinking more about maybe usage during the week. So what we did, although we know there is a lot of selection, so the results that I'm about to discuss, you can always discount selection, was to consider whether you access or not access the tool. Okay, so now what I'm going to do will be to think about a treatment. Not anymore whether you access, whether you had the BallotBot or the voter guide, but it's more, did you access the tool during the week? Of course, these things scream selection. We did some check on whether the fact that you access the tool is correlated with characteristics such that how well you did in the first quiz. We don't find correlation there, but I mean, there could be selection. But we find some interesting results. Okay, so if we look at and compare those that were in the BallotBot group, and we look at those that were using the bot versus those that didn't use the bot, we basically that there is anyway an increase in the ability of replying to quiz question. Okay. This is not true if we look at people that were in the voter guide group. Okay, so the voter guide group, even if you are accessing the voter guide, is not that affected your ability to answer this quiz question. And this is the interesting part, which we might do other works from these results, is that if we look at the reasoning quality, actually what you see is that those that were accessing BallotBot didn't actually have an increase or statistically significant increase in the ability of arguing why they voted in a certain direction or not. But it's actually true that that happened if we are looking at people in the voter guide group. Okay, so again, there could be selection in the results we are showing here, but this is kind of an interesting result because we're basically seeing that BallotBot might be good potentially for this very kind of quiz questions, so answer to specific questions. But as soon as you move to more arguing, okay, why you are doing that, the quality goes up significantly only for those that are using the guide. Okay, so and this is something for us that again it's relevant for policymaker. In a sense, we are thinking that these tools, they're not substitute of voter guides. Okay, we still think there is value in the fact that people can have access to, let's say, the full picture. Okay, so I think these kind of results goes toward, or they may be relevant for kind of this literature, try to understand what AI might do also in education and these other kind of fields. So final results, all these things. Do we see an effect on turnout? Or do we see an effect on voting yes or no? We do not find any effect here. We are kind of very cautious in saying that there is a zero effect because the kind of experiment we're running wasn't really about this, and there were a few things that might have affected the results anyway. So, for instance, if we look at turnout at presidential election, it's unclear whether we can expect an effect on this dimension given the kind of treatment we were using. So, in a sense, I mean, as you know, we wanted to report these. We're already kind of aware that potentially here we couldn't find anything. And most of the contribution for us of the paper comes from the first part of the experiment. Now, I'm gonna conclude. So can AI be an ally to voters seeking cheap and reliable information? We suggest that yes, they can be an ally, particularly if you think about individuals that have kind of are lower in the skill or the knowledge distribution. Of course, there are a few caveats to keep in mind. Besides this idea of having most of the effect of on the lower side of the distribution, the other point that I was kind of suggesting before, that to provide feedbacks on the quality of the tool is very important. And the point about the actual retained knowledge or kind of let's say retained knowledge, where we see that using the bot, it doesn't imply that you do better. And in any way, I mean, if you do better, it's not about say reasoning about what you're about to do. While that's true if we think about the voter guide. So that's it from my side. I think I went over my time, but thanks a lot for the comments and questions you have given me. Thanks.
Thanks, Sergio. Are there any questions on the floor?
Sorry,
ahead, Max.
like so far I mean, you're working with an AI that is politically neutral, right? Are you thinking about tweaking that in the sense that we are already living in a world where if I ask X who's going to be the best next US president, he's probably going to answer me Elon Musk, right?
Yeah, correct. So no, that's so that, I guess there are many different venues in which you can expand from what you've been doing so far. Okay. And I think we try to be careful in our paper, and we kind of frame it in a way in which we're thinking more really as a kind of head for policymakers rather than something that is testing the bias of existing LLM or how existing LLM might affect your, let's say, I mean, the exposure of different LLMs might affect like the kind of knowledge you get exposed. But that's for sure something that needs to be done. But indeed, we are doing something in a natural environment, and we are trying to think about yes, there are states that might want to provide kind of neutral information to voters while things are happening in the surrounding kind of environments.
Because I mean, political slant of LLMs could be related to the reliability. And you said that whether people think that these tools are reliable or not is crucial for your results. So I'm wondering whether we're moving more
That's
towards a world where we have a plurality of LLMs that have
That's
some
a good-
political slant, and that impacts the credibility.
That's a good point. I mean, one dimension that's relevant here, and again, so this idea of using the reg, so the main generation, is a way for a policymaker to reduce this push toward potentially the extremes. Okay, so as soon as you start relying on external knowledge that you assume is neutral, then maybe you are able to affect the potential leaning of the LLM. But I mean, in a sense, I mean, depending on the individuals, the way in which they think something is reliable or not might be different. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Max? Yeah, Valeria, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe we can stop the official part because we are
Mm.
just hitting the 1 hour.